I'm Mark Bakaitis and I'm an independent filmmaker. I think I wanted to get into film when I was young. I struggled with my drawing skills and I was lucky that my grandfather gave me a Super 8 camera when I was about maybe 12. And I think I'd just seen Star Wars not long before and I just started making films as a kid. I was lucky to do a work experience in my late teens at Fred Skepsi's at the Film House. So it was a pretty prestige company, so I was pretty lucky to kind of work there and worked on a few TVCs. It was back in the film days. Things were shot on 35mm back then. And I also got to work at Channel 10 when I was younger too, so for work experience. So it was a good start. And then I went to a tech school that had a film and TV course and started doing music videos for bands while we were in school, you know. So we would basically take all the equipment out of the studio and head down to the Prince of Wales Hotel in St Kilda, and I've been doing music videos ever since. Dogs are the best people. Dogs are the best people. And then some of my friends got into the Swinburne course before it was the VCA course, and so I crewed on lots of their films for a couple of years. I think the first serious film I ever made after film school was a film called Mercy, and it was very sort of, you know, European, black and white, arty. But it really taught me, it was the first time I'd worked on an online studio, so I had to go in and I got a proper sound mix and titles, and back then that cost a lot of money. It was in cinema papers, it was listed in that when Reservoir Dogs was on the cover, so that was pretty cool. Three filmmakers that really inspire me are Jess Franco, he's one of my favourite directors. Jean Rollin, the French director, who's similar to Franco in a way. And maybe thirdly, it's not really a director, but I was really influenced by the cinema of transgression, which was like an underground New York sort of punk filmmaking in the late 80s. There were people like Nick Zedd and Richard Kern. I was really inspired by that movement. It had a lot of parallels with punk and it was pretty extreme underground filmmaking. Three films that inspire me. I like so many different films. Off the top of my head, Angel Heart, that was a really cool film, very 80s and stylised with Mickey Rourke in it. But that film, I was really inspired by that film when I was at film school. Jess Franco, who I mentioned before, I really like this film that he made called Love Letters of a Portuguese Nun, which was this extreme sort of exploitation film about a nun that goes into a convent that's basically run by Satanists.
O eternal Prince of Darkness, may we serve your master.
Maybe number three, Ghost of the Civil Dead, that was directed by John Hillcott and produced by Evan English and shot by Paul Goldman, starring Nick Cave and lots of other underground Australian people. That's a pretty intense prison film. Blixa Bargell did some of the music as well. Pretty harrowing film. There's lots of films I like. They're probably not my favourites, but they're just the ones that came into my head.
Please put your hands together for Mark Brandon Chopper Reed.
The vision I bring into my work, that's a big question, like a deep question. It was interesting, I saw Trent Reznor, he was inducted into the Hall of Fame a couple of weeks ago, and he said, it's really weird when you make something that's so fragile and intimate and then it goes out to the rest of the world. Now, obviously my films aren't as popular as his music, but it's the same thing. You make something that's so personal And I just make things for myself, really. I don't make them for anyone else, and that's probably a fault in some ways. But I just make something and then I put it out to the world. And most of the times it gets misunderstood or misinterpreted, but it doesn't matter. I've made something that was an idea or a dream in my head. I think a lot of my work is associated with dreams. I don't make straight narratives. Dreams don't make sense. That's the way I look at filmmaking. It's just an obscure idea, and it's often from a dark place sometimes, and I get it out and I make it a reality. And that's a process, and the process keeps you in the moment. It's a spiritual thing. I think my favourite film I made so far is Cult Girls. Obviously it's my most recent film. It's just come out, and it was a long process. The journey itself, I got to go to Germany, I got to shoot in Lithuania, I got to come back to Australia and work with so many fantastic people, and then I got to do my post-production in Los Angeles with executive producers from over there. So the whole journey was just amazing, and to have it finished and released by Umbrella Entertainment, who has so many great films on their catalogue, it was just an amazing experience all around.
Sleepwalk, children, into the valley of death.
Well, I'm currently working in pre-production for a documentary about Melbourne record stores. After making Cult Girls, I want to make something that's more community orientated and a little bit more positive and less dark and introverted. So, and I've done so many music videos in my career, and music has always been a big part of all my film work. And this is another way of showing my musical knowledge and working with some of the people that have inspired me in the music scene from over the last 20 plus years. I think the biggest challenge for the Australian film industry is that it's going to be interesting post-COVID to see what happens with the funding bodies. I think in some ways there'll be more opportunities because you won't have to get a cinema release to secure funding. So I think there'll be more opportunities but less money. My process for choosing actors, it's taken me a long time to really understand, I think, what a good actor really is. With my experience in music videos in the past, I always chose people that were visually dynamic, but especially with Cult Girls, I learnt so much about presence. Nathan Hill, my casting agent on Cult Girls, I think he taught me so much about the process, so I was really lucky to learn. I think I'm finally at the stage now where I can judge whether people can act or not, but it's taken me a long time. I think giving unknown actors a chance is a good thing, but I think in the end, the more experience that people have got, the better for you, really. Dream actors to work with, that's a tricky one, you know, like sometimes you've got to choose the person that you feel's right for the film. I think if you try and put someone in a film just because they're famous, it might not always work. I think casting the right person is always important, whether they're famous or not.
It's really weird because we're living in the year 2015 now, and back in the 80s I used to cop a lot of shit because of how I used to look, having a mohawk and all that stuff.
Punk to me means trying to sort of, you know, get rid of all the restrictions that you've been brought up with, like, you know, how you judge people by what they look like and things like that, and plus also trying to find an alternative.
I think the biggest challenge is a budgetary thing, and just to try and find money. It's almost like being a busker in the street, or being, you know, out the front of the supermarket and trying to beg for money. Just the logistics of making a film. It's just, there's no way around it. It's like pouring money down the drain. It's like being a junkie, being a filmmaker. It really is. What advice would I give to aspiring filmmakers? It's tricky because I've always been this person that's kind of spontaneous, and I go out there and I'm like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to make it. And I think that's a really good attitude to have, because in the end, you've got to make it happen yourself. But at the same time, I think if you take a little bit more time with your pre-production, get your script right, hone it right, you know, do lots of readings, get your casting right, take that time to prepare, because you only have one shot at it. And I feel like in the past, you know, some things I've rushed into, but at the same time, they wouldn't have got made if I didn't have that attitude. So it's a real balancing act. You know, obviously having funding is fantastic, and to try and aim for that is good, but sometimes that's not always an option. Do I believe my career should be local or overseas in Hollywood? Well, it was interesting. I got to go to LA just last year and do my post-production on my film there. So it was a real eye-opener. I think there's so many opportunities there, but you really need to play the game. And I was a bit intimidated going over there. I was very lucky with the people that I worked with and some of the people I met. It was an experience, but in the end, I think the state of America at the moment politically, it was a sort of frightening place in a way, and I was glad to be back in Australia. And I think after all this COVID thing, I'm so glad of being in Australia. I would have hated to be stuck over there doing post when COVID hit. Thanks, Dia, for having me on the show. It was great to work with you on a music video. I think you really make good personal relationships with people on set. I think working with people, you really get to know them in a way that you don't socially. Thank you for having me on this show. Thanks.